I spent 43 years loving a man who promised he'd always protect me. Then I found myself standing outside a lawyer's office. My own children blocking the door, telling me I wasn't family enough for my husband's will reading. "This is only for immediate family," my daughter-in-law said with a smile that never reached her eyes. My son, the same boy I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, couldn't even look me in the face. But what they didn't know was that my husband had left me something they never expected to find: a brown envelope, a secret that would change everything. When I handed that envelope to the lawyer, I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The silence in that room as my children's faces went pale told me everything I needed to know about the family I thought I had, and the one I was about to discover. If you want to know what was in that envelope, and the shocking truth my husband kept from all of us for over 40 years, make sure to follow our channel, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. My name is Lorraine, and I'm 68 years old. I never thought I'd be standing outside a door that I wasn't allowed to enter. Not after 43 years of marriage. Not after holding my husband's hand through everything life threw at us. But that's exactly where I found myself on that Tuesday afternoon in March, clutching my purse with trembling fingers, a brown envelope hidden inside it. "Mrs. Davidson, I think it would be best if you waited outside." Those words came from my daughter-in-law, Rebecca. Her voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes were cold. She had one hand on my son's arm, her red fingernails digging into his designer suit. "This reading is really just for immediate family." Immediate family. As if I wasn't immediate family. As if I hadn't spent the last 8 months cleaning Richard's wounds when the cancer ate through his skin, when the morphine stopped working, and he'd cry into my nightgown at 3 a.m. As if I hadn't been the one to wash his body myself after he passed, refusing to let strangers handle him. My son, my Michael, wouldn't even look at me. The same boy who once called me his guardian angel when nightmares woke him. He just stared at his Italian leather shoes, jaw clenched. Across the room, my daughter Jennifer giggled with her husband checking her watch. Like this was just an inconvenient appointment before lunch. Like we weren't here because her father had died 11 days ago. "Mom," Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just protocol. We'll fill you in after." Protocol. Is that what they called erasing a wife from her husband's final wishes? I said nothing. Just clutched my purse tighter, feeling the edge of that envelope inside. I nodded, my face a mask of calm I didn't feel, and turned toward the door. The attorney, a small pale man named Mr. Goldstein, seemed uncomfortable. He shuffled papers on the large oak table, clearing his throat. "Actually," he said, glancing up at me, "Mrs. Davidson, before you go, did you bring the item Mr. Davidson mentioned to me? The one he said you might find?" The room went silent. Rebecca's smile faltered. Michael finally looked at me, confusion crossing his face. "What item?" Jennifer asked sharply from across the room. I reached into my purse and pulled out the brown envelope. It wasn't sealed, just folded over at the top. Inside was the note I'd found in Richard's navy blue suit pocket the night I dressed him for his casket. His handwriting was shaky from the medication, but still unmistakably his. I handed it to Mr. Goldstein without a word. The attorney adjusted his glasses and opened it carefully. His eyes widened slightly as he read whatever was inside. He looked up at me, then around at the others in the room. "I think," he said slowly, "we may need to postpone this reading." "Absolutely not," Rebecca snapped. "We've waited long enough." Mr. Goldstein ignored her. "Mrs. Davidson, would you mind waiting in my office down the hall? I need to verify something in our system." I nodded and turned to leave again, catching the look of fury on Rebecca's face. As I walked out, I heard Jennifer's husband mutter something about old people and their drama, but I also heard Mr. Goldstein's chair scrape back, heard him say he needed 5 minutes. It was right then that I knew. Richard had kept his promise after all. You see, the night before he died, while I sat beside his bed holding his hand, he'd whispered something to me that I couldn't quite make out. I leaned closer and he said, "I fixed it, Lori. They won't take what's yours, just trust me." I thought it was the morphine talking, but now, watching my children's faces through the glass door as Mr. Goldstein returned with a black folder in his hands. Watching the color drain from their faces as he spoke words I couldn't hear, I understood. Whatever was in that note had just changed everything. And from the way they all turned to stare at me through the glass, their faces pale as ghosts, I knew that they finally saw me, not as an old woman to be shuffled aside, not as an inconvenience, but as the woman their father had loved enough to protect, even from beyond the grave. The night they took Richard's body away was the loneliest of my life. The funeral home staff had been kind. They'd let me have a final moment with him before closing the casket. Everyone else had gone home hours before. Even Michael and Jennifer hadn't stayed, claiming they needed to arrange hotel rooms for relatives flying in. But I stayed. I stayed until my legs went numb from standing beside him. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I finally returned to our empty house on Maple Street. The one with the crooked mailbox Richard always promised to fix, but never did. The porch light was still on. I'd left it burning as if some part of me believed he might still come home. The house creaked and settled around me, 43 years of memories whispering from every corner. I couldn't bear to go into our bedroom yet. Instead, I made my way to the walk-in closet we shared, my fingers brushing against his shirts still hanging there. Each one carried his scent, that mix of Old Spice and the mint lozenges he always kept in his pocket. That's when I saw it. His navy blue suit, the one he wore to every important meeting at the hardware store we'd built together. The jacket with the slightly frayed right cuff that he refused to replace because it had character. He'd worn it the day we signed the papers to buy the store back in 1987. He'd worn it the day we paid off our mortgage in 2004. It was Richard's victory suit, he called it. "You should be buried in this," I whispered to the empty room, tears sliding down my cheeks. "Your victory suit for your final victory." I called the funeral home immediately. The woman who answered sounded half asleep, but she understood. "Bring it first thing in the morning, Mrs. Davidson. We'll make sure he's dressed in it before anyone arrives." I held the suit against my chest, breathing in what remained of him. That's when I felt it. Something stiff in the inside pocket. My fingers found a folded piece of paper, creased from being carried around. When I pulled it out, I recognized Richard's handwriting immediately, though it was shakier than I remembered. The cancer had weakened him so much toward the end. I unfolded it slowly, my heart pounding. The paper was dated just 3 weeks earlier, during his last hospital stay. "My dearest Laurie," it began. I sank to the floor of the closet, my back against his hanging shirts as I read the rest. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. And if you found this in my suit pocket, it means you're making sure I look my best, even now. That's who you are, always thinking of others first. I've made a terrible mistake, Laurie. I let Michael and Jennifer convince me to change things at the store while I was sick. They said it was for the best. Tax purposes, they claimed. But I've come to see what they really want. I've watched how they treat you when they think I'm sleeping. I've heard what they plan to do once I'm gone. So I fixed it. If they try to leave you out, if they try to take what we built together, take this note to Franklin Goldstein. Tell him you found it. He'll know what to do. There's more paperwork he has, things I've been working on. If they treat you with respect, if they honor your place in my life and in the business, then maybe this note never needs to see the light of day. But I know my children, Laurie, and I'm afraid I know what they've become. Trust Goldstein, and remember that I loved you until my last breath. Always yours, Richard." I sat there on the closet floor until sunrise, the paper clutched in my trembling hands. Part of me wanted to burn it, to let whatever Richard had discovered die with him. I didn't want to believe my children could be so cruel. What mother wants to see the worst in her own flesh and blood? But another part of me remembered the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered hospital rooms. The way Rebecca would pat my hand condescendingly and say, "Don't worry about the business, Lorraine. We'll handle everything." The way Michael avoided looking at me when I asked about store finances. For 3 days, I carried that note in my purse, unsure what to do. I prayed for guidance each night, sitting alone at our kitchen table where Richard's empty chair faced mine. Should I confront them? Should I trust my husband's warning? Or was this just the paranoia of a dying man? Then Rebecca showed up at the store on Friday morning. She walked in like she owned the place, designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors I'd polished myself for decades. "Lorraine," she said, not even bothering with Mom anymore, "we need to talk about your role here going forward." She explained, as if to a child, that the family had decided it was best if I stepped back from daily operations. "At your age, you should be relaxing, not working," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. That's when I knew. Richard had been right. The note wasn't paranoia, it was protection. A final act of love from a man who knew his family better than I had allowed myself to admit. When the day of the will reading came, I was ready. The brown envelope was in my purse. And when they tried to exclude me, I didn't fight. I simply handed over the first piece of Richard's final plan, like passing the first domino that would start a chain reaction none of us could stop. I never expected what would happen next. I never imagined what other secrets Richard had been keeping, or that some of those secrets would bring a stranger into our lives who would change everything. For 5 days after the funeral, that envelope burned a hole in my nightstand drawer. I'd wake up at night and stare at it in the darkness, the moonlight from the window just barely illuminating its edges. Each morning, I'd take it out, hold it, and then put it back, unable to decide. The truth is, I was afraid, not just of what might be in those legal documents Mr. Goldstein had mentioned, but of what delivering that note would do to my family. Would it shatter whatever fragile connection I still had with my children? Was justice worth the cost of losing them completely? Our family photos still sat on my bedside table. Michael's high school graduation, all 4 of us smiling. Richard's arm around my waist. Jennifer beaming in her cheerleader uniform. We looked happy. We were happy. When had things changed? When had money and the store become more important than love? On the 3rd night after the funeral, I dreamt of Richard. We were sitting on our porch swing, the one he built when we first bought the house in '79. His face wasn't gaunt from cancer, but full and healthy, like in his 50s. He wasn't saying anything, just looking at me with those kind blue eyes, holding my hand. "What should I do?" I asked him in the dream. He just squeezed my hand 3 times, our secret code for "I love you." I woke up crying, my pillow damp with tears. The alarm clock read 4:17 a.m. I got up, made a cup of tea, and sat at our kitchen table with Richard's Bible. It fell open to Proverbs. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Was it a sign? I wasn't sure, but I knew what Richard would have done. He always said the hardest right was better than the easiest wrong. I was still sitting there when my phone rang at 7:30. It was Sam, our assistant manager at Davidson Hardware. "Lorraine?" His voice was uncertain. "I thought you should know. Rebecca and Michael are here. They're changing the locks and the security codes. They told me to call the staff and tell everyone not to come in today." My teacup clattered against the saucer. "What? Why?" "They said," Sam hesitated. "They said there's going to be a reorganization and that you won't be involved in daily operations anymore. Rebecca asked for your office keys. The store, my store, our store, the place where I'd worked alongside Richard since 1987, where I'd arranged the displays, ordered the inventory, balanced the books, and greeted customers by name for over 30 years. They were locking me out before the will was even read. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I threw on clothes, not caring if they matched. On my way out, I stopped at the nightstand and grabbed the envelope. Whatever was going to happen, I was done hesitating. When I pulled into the parking lot of Davidson Hardware, Rebecca's Mercedes was parked in my spot, the one with the small sign Richard had made, reserved for the boss lady. He'd surprised me with it on our 30th anniversary, saying I was the real brains behind the operation. Through the front windows, I could see Rebecca pointing at things, talking to a man in a suit I didn't recognize. Michael was on his phone, pacing near the register. Neither of them saw me park. I sat in my car, the envelope in my lap. In that moment, I thought about burning it again, about walking away, about accepting that this chapter of my life was over and letting my children have what they so desperately wanted. But then I remembered Richard's face in those final days, how he gripped my hand when the pain was at its worst. how he'd look at me with such trust. He'd believed I would follow through. He'd trusted me to be strong when the time came. I walked through those doors with my head high, the little bell jingling as I entered. Rebecca's face flashed with irritation when she saw me. "Lorraine," she said coolly, "we weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," I replied, looking pointedly at the locksmith working on the back office door. Michael at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. He put his phone away and approached me. "Mom, we were going to call you later. We just thought, with everything going on, you might want some time to yourself." "To grieve," Rebecca added with a sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. "By changing the locks on the business I helped build?" I asked quietly. "It's just standard procedure during a transition," said the man in the suit, extending his hand. "Walter Finch, business consultant. The children brought me in to help streamline operations." The children, as if Michael and Jennifer were still 5 and 7 instead of 41 and 43. "I see," I said, not taking his hand. "And this transition was planned when exactly? Before or after your father was buried?" I looked directly at Michael. He couldn't hold my gaze. "Mom, please. This isn't the time or place." "When is the time, Michael? After you've removed every trace of me from this store. After you've erased 35 years of my life." Rebecca stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Lorraine, let's be realistic. You're nearly 70. This place needs new energy, new ideas. You should be enjoying retirement, not worrying about inventory and payroll." I felt something snap inside me then, the last thread of hesitation. "The will reading is tomorrow," I said calmly. "Until then, nothing changes here." "Actually," Rebecca said, her tone hardening, "as next of kin, Michael and Jennifer have temporary authority to—" "As Richard's wife," I interrupted, "I have equal claim, and I believe Mr. Goldstein will have something to say about all this tomorrow." The look that passed between them confirmed everything. They knew they were doing something wrong. They were just hoping I'd be too broken by grief to fight back. I left without another word, the envelope still in my purse. My decision was made. Tomorrow at the reading I would hand it over. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same strength I'd found to walk into that store today. What I didn't know then was that the envelope wasn't just about the store. It was about to reveal a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about my husband and about the family we'd built together. Mr. Goldstein's office was quieter than a church on Monday morning. The only sound was the soft whir of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle as he sorted through the papers in the black folder. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. "Mrs. Davidson," he said finally, looking up at me through wire-rimmed glasses. "What I'm about to show you, Richard wanted you to see this privately first, before the others." He slid a document across his mahogany desk. The paper was official looking, with a corporate logo at the top I didn't recognize. Westlake Ventures LLC. "What is this?" I asked, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. "It's a transfer of ownership agreement," Mr. Goldstein explained, his voice gentle. "For Davidson Hardware." I stared at the document, the words swimming before my eyes. As I scanned the text, certain phrases jumped out at me. Full transfer of assets, consideration of $1, new management structure, and then, at the bottom, a signature I recognized all too well, my husband's. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Richard would never sell the store. That store was our life." Mr. Goldstein sighed. "The agreement is dated January 15th of this year. Richard was already quite ill by then. January, when the cancer had spread to his bones, when the pain was so bad he could barely sign his name, when Michael and Rebecca had been visiting every day, bringing meals, offering to handle paperwork so Richard could focus on getting better." "Who is Westlake Ventures?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. Mr. Goldstein pulled out another document. "Westlake Ventures LLC was formed 6 months ago. The registered owner is Christopher Maitland, Jennifer's brother-in-law," I said numbly. Christopher, her husband Paul's younger brother, the one who was always talking about investment opportunities at family gatherings, the one Richard had always said he didn't trust. "Yes," Mr. Goldstein confirmed. And there's more. He showed me another document, a bank transfer receipt, a withdrawal of $50,000 from the store's business account to a personal account in Michael's name, dated 2 weeks before Richard died. Your son told Richard this was for inventory, Mr. Goldstein explained, but our investigation shows it was transferred to an offshore account the next day. My head was spinning. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that I could barely process it. My own children had conspired to steal the business while their father was dying. They had taken advantage of his weakened state, his medication-fogged mind. How did Richard find out? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, Mr. Goldstein's expression softened. He had his suspicions. He asked me to look into it discreetly. But what truly confirmed things for him happened about a month before he passed. He explained that Richard had asked Michael to bring him to the store. One last visit. Michael had reluctantly agreed, thinking his father was too weak to notice anything amiss. But that day, Richard had witnessed something that broke his heart. Your husband told me that he saw Rebecca berating an elderly customer who had knocked over a display, Mr. Goldstein said. And when you tried to intervene, she publicly humiliated you, called you past your prime, and suggested you were becoming senile. The memory crashed over me. I had tried to hide it from Richard. Hadn't told him how Rebecca had spoken to me that day, how the regular customers had stared in shock, how Sam, the assistant manager, had later found me crying in the stockroom. I'd been so ashamed. Richard saw it all from the car, Mr. Goldstein continued. He said that's when he knew he had to fix what he'd done. That's when he came to me and began drafting a new will and nullifying the transfer agreement. My throat tightened. Even in his final weeks, Richard had been fighting for me, for us. Is that what's in the black folder? I asked, nodding toward the thick portfolio that Mr. Goldstein had brought back into the conference room. Yes, he confirmed. A complete revocation of the transfer, a new will, and something else. Something Richard discovered during his investigation that he felt you should know. He opened the folder and carefully removed a photograph that had been paperclipped to the inside. It was old. The colors faded to a sepia tone. In it, I saw myself, much younger, maybe 25, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. My heart stopped. That's not Michael, I said automatically, though no one had suggested it was. And it's not Jennifer. Mr. Goldstein nodded. Richard found this in a safety deposit box that Michael didn't know about. There was a birth certificate with it. With trembling fingers, I turned the photo over. Written on the back in handwriting I didn't recognize was a name, Daniel and his mother, 1956. Daniel. The name hit me like a physical blow, a name I hadn't spoken aloud in 42 years, a secret I had buried so deeply that sometimes, in the dark of night, I could almost convince myself it had never happened. How did Richard find him? I whispered, tears blurring my vision. He hired a private investigator last year, Mr. Goldstein explained. After his diagnosis, he said there were no more secrets worth keeping once he knew his time was limited. I pressed the photo to my chest, overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't name. Grief, yes. Shame, certainly. But also a wild, impossible hope. Is Daniel alive? I hardly dared to ask. Mr. Goldstein smiled for the first time since I'd entered his office. Yes, Mrs. Davidson. And that's not all. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Daniel works for me. He's been my legal assistant for the past 3 years. The room tilted around me. All this time, my firstborn had been so close. Richard found him first, Mr. Goldstein continued gently. They met several times over the past 2 years, and together, they prepared what's in that will. A will that splits ownership of Davidson Hardware between you and Daniel, with nothing for Michael or Jennifer. A will that would destroy what remained of my family. A will that would bring back a son I had given away before I'd even held him. A will that was about to change everything. The photograph trembled in my hands. Those eyes, my mother's eyes, stared back at me from the face of an infant I'd held for only 20 minutes before they took him away. I'd been just 17 when I found out I was pregnant, living with my aunts after my parents died in a car accident. It was 1956, a different time, a different world. Unmarried mothers were shameful secrets to be hidden away. Would you like to meet him? Mr. Goldstein asked softly. I couldn't speak, could only nod, my heart hammering against my ribs like it might break free. Mr. Goldstein picked up his phone and pressed a button. Sarah, could you ask Daniel to come in now, please? The seconds that followed were the longest of my life, longer than waiting for the pregnancy test, longer than the hours of labor, longer even than the night Richard died, when I sat watching each shallow breath, wondering if it would be his last. The door opened, and there he was, a man in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair and my mother's eyes, tall like Richard, but with my chin, my nose. He wore a gray suit, a blue tie, professional, poised, but his hands, my hands, were fidgeting at his sides. Hello, he said, his voice deep and steady, despite the emotion I could see working in his throat. I'm Daniel. I stood on unsteady legs, clutching the edge of Mr. Goldstein's desk for support. I'm Lorraine, I whispered, as if he might not know. We stood there, two strangers connected by blood and separated by decades, neither knowing what came next. Then Daniel took a step forward, and another, until he was close enough that I could see the faint lines around his eyes when he smiled nervously. Richard showed me pictures of you, he said, from when you were younger, and recent ones too. He talked about you all the time. The mention of Richard broke something loose in me. He never told me, I whispered. All those months he was sick meeting you and he never said a word. Daniel's smile faltered. He wanted to, but he was afraid it would be too much, with everything else you were dealing with. He made me promise we'd wait until... He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Until Richard was gone. Until I was alone. Until I needed someone else to hold on to. May I? Daniel asked, gesturing to a chair beside me. I nodded, sinking back into my own seat as he sat down. Not too close. Respectful of boundaries neither of us knew how to navigate. I was adopted by a family in Oregon, he began. The HEIRSes. Good people, kind. They told me I was adopted when I was 10. I always wondered about you, but I didn't start looking until my adoptive mother died in 2018. I'm sorry, I said automatically. Thank you. He smiled. My smile, I realized, with a jolt. I hired a private investigator, but the trail was cold. The records were sealed and the convent where I was born had closed in the 80s. I almost gave up. Then Richard found me. How? I asked. He hired the same investigator, believe it or not. Marty Jenkins. Best in Boston, apparently. Richard was terminally ill, but he spent his final months meeting me for lunch every Tuesday. Said it was his treatment appointment, but he was really coming to the cafe across from my apartment. I closed my eyes, remembering how Richard would insist on driving himself to Tuesday appointments, how he'd come home looking tired but somehow lighter, peaceful. He told me everything about you, Daniel continued, how you met at a Christmas party in 1972, how you nursed him through his first heart attack in 98, how you built the hardware store together. He said you were the strongest person he'd ever known. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I didn't bother wiping them away. When he found out what Michael and Jennifer were planning, the store, the money, he was furious. But he was also worried about you. He asked if I'd help protect you. That's when he changed his will. I looked up sharply. You helped him write it. Daniel nodded. I found the shell company Michael was using, traced the money. Richard was devastated when he realized how they'd manipulated him. He wanted to make it right. By cutting them out completely, I asked, my maternal instinct flaring despite everything. They're still my children, Daniel. Something flickered across his face. Hurt, perhaps. I immediately regretted my words. I didn't mean... It's okay, he said quickly. I understand. And for what it's worth, I told Richard the same thing. That's why there's a clause in the will. You can choose to include them if you want. It's your decision, not his, not mine. I stared at him, this stranger who was my blood, who seemed to understand me better than the children I'd raised. Richard talked about you every time we met, Daniel said, his voice softening. He said you gave the best of yourself to everyone, your family, your customers, your community, but he worried that you never kept enough for yourself. That's what the will is about, Lorraine. making sure you're taken care of for once. My head was spinning with questions, with doubts, with a lifetime of secrets suddenly exposed to light. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn book. Richard gave me this. Said it belonged to you once. It was a prayer book, tiny, with a cracked leather cover. I recognized it immediately. My confirmation gift, age 13. I'd lost it. No, not lost it. I'd had it with me at the convent. Had clutched it during labor. He found it in that safety deposit box, Daniel explained. With my birth certificate and the photo, he thought you might want it back. I took the little book with trembling hands, opened it to find my girlish handwriting on the inside cover. Lorraine Ann Sullivan, May 12th, 1952. Below it, a Bible verse I'd underlined. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Looking at those words, written by a girl who had no idea what life would bring her, I felt something shift inside me, a piece clicking into place. Daniel, I said, meeting his gaze, my mother's eyes in a face that echoed my own. Would you like to come home with me? Just to talk. I think we have a lot to catch up on. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. I'd like that very much, Lorraine. As we stood to leave, Mr. Goldstein reminded us gently, the will reading is still scheduled for tomorrow, with everyone present. I nodded, suddenly very tired but also strangely peaceful. We'll be there, I said. All of us. The conference room felt smaller the next day, crammed with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I sat on one side of the long mahogany table, Daniel beside me, his presence both strange and comforting. Across from us sat Michael, Rebecca, Jennifer, and her husband, Paul. Their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in a red blazer, completed their side of the battlefield. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin the formal reading of Richard Davidson's last will and testament, I need to address some irregularities that have come to light. Rebecca leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light. What irregularities? We've been through enough delays. Mr. Goldstein ignored her, instead placing a document on the table. This is a transfer of ownership agreement for Davidson Hardware, dated January 15th of this year. It purports to transfer all assets of the business to Westlake Ventures, LLC, for the sum of $1. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer's husband suddenly became very interested in his cufflinks. This agreement, Mr. Goldstein continued, was signed when Richard Davidson was heavily medicated for pain. According to his oncologist, whom I spoke with yesterday, Richard was on a morphine drip that would have significantly impaired his judgment. That's ridiculous, Jennifer snapped. Dad knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to secure the family business for future generations. By selling it to your brother-in-law's shell company, I asked quietly. The room went still. Jennifer's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Westlake Ventures. Daniel spoke up, his voice calm and professional. Registered 6 months ago by Christopher Maitland. Your husband's brother, I believe. He nodded toward Paul, who had gone pale. Rebecca recovered first. Who is this? She demanded, pointing at Daniel. What is he doing here? Mr. Goldstein placed another document on the table. This is Richard Davidson's true last will and testament, signed and witnessed 3 weeks before his death. It revokes all previous wills and nullifies the transfer agreement as an act made under duress and medication. He turned to Daniel. And this is Daniel HEIRS, who has a direct interest in these proceedings. What interest? Michael asked, speaking for the first time. He's not family. I felt Daniel tense beside me. I reached over and placed my hand on his, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. Actually, Mr. Goldstein said, placing a third document on the table, a birth certificate, yellowed with age. According to this, he is. Jennifer snatched up the paper, her eyes scanning it frantically. What is this? Some kind of joke? She looked up at me, confusion warring with anger. It says a mother, Lorraine Sullivan. That's your maiden name. I took a deep breath. Yes, and father, unknown. She threw the paper down. This is ridiculous. Mom, what is this? It's the truth, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Daniel is my son, born in 1956, before I met your father. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Rebecca's mouth hung open in shock. Jennifer looked from me to Daniel and back again, her expression hardening. You're lying, she finally said. This is some trick to steal our inheritance. Daniel shook his head. I didn't know Lorraine existed until 2 years ago. Richard found me, not the other way around. Dad knew about this? Michael asked, his voice hollow. Your father discovered Daniel during his final months, Mr. Goldstein explained. They developed a relationship, and Richard chose to include Daniel in his will. Include him? Rebecca's voice rose an octave. What does that mean? Mr. Goldstein opened the black folder. The will is quite clear. Davidson Hardware and all associated assets are to be divided equally between Lorraine Davidson and Daniel HEIRS. The explosion I'd feared came instantly. Jennifer leapt to her feet, her chair crashing backward. This is insane. That store belongs to us, to the family. We're Richard's children. So am I, Daniel said quietly. You're nothing, she screamed, tears of rage filling her eyes. You're some mistake she made before she even met our father. I flinched as if slapped. Michael at least had the decency to look ashamed at his sister's outburst. Jennifer, please, he muttered, sit down. But she was beyond reason, turning on me now. How could you? How could you keep this from us our entire lives? How could you let this stranger swoop in and take everything? I met her gaze, seeing not the successful real estate agent in designer clothes, but the little girl who'd once clung to my skirts at the grocery store. I gave him up for adoption when I was 17, I said softly. My aunts sent me to a convent to have the baby in secret. I held him once before they took him away. I never thought I'd see him again. Well, how convenient that he showed up just as Dad was dying, Rebecca interjected, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Right when there was money to be had. Daniel stood then, his height imposing but his demeanor calm. I've been working for Mr. Goldstein for 3 years. I make a good living as a legal assistant. I don't need your money or your business. But Richard, your father, wanted to make things right. Not just for Lorraine and not just for me, but for all of us. By cutting us out? Michael asked bitterly. By protecting what matters, Daniel corrected. The store your parents built together, the legacy they created. Richard saw what you were planning to do with it. Sell it off for parts, cash out. He couldn't bear to see that happen. Their attorney finally spoke up. We'll contest this, of course. A will signed 3 weeks before death, suddenly including a secret child no one knew about. No judge will uphold this. Mr. Goldstein smiled thinly. You're welcome to try. But Richard documented everything meticulously. The fraudulent transfer, the money Michael took from the business account, the offshore transfers. Do you really want all of that examined in court? Michael's face drained of color. Jennifer looked at him sharply. What money? What is he talking about? But Michael couldn't meet her eyes, confirming everything without saying a word. Rebecca stood, gathering her purse. This is absurd. We're leaving. Our attorney will be in touch. As they rose to go, I called out, Wait! They paused, turning back with varying degrees of hostility. Before you leave, there's something else you should know. I nodded to Mr. Goldstein, who handed me a sealed envelope. Richard left this for me to give to you, only if things went this way. Michael hesitated, then took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Richard's distinctive handwriting. I knew what it said. I'd read it the night before with Daniel. It was short, just a few lines, but it cut to the heart of everything. To my children, Michael read aloud, his voice growing more strained with each word. If you're reading this, it means you've chosen money over family. It means you've treated your mother, the woman who gave you everything, as disposable. I've failed as a father if this is who you've become. The store was never just a business. It was a home. It was our heart. I hope someday you'll understand what really matters. Until then, I've made my choice. Dad. The silence that followed was broken only by Jennifer's quiet sob. Without another word, She turned and fled the room. Michael stood frozen, the letter clutched in his hand. Rebecca tugged at his arm, but he shook her off. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible, "is there any way to fix this?" It was the question of a little boy who'd broken something precious, hoping it could still be mended, and despite everything, my heart ached for him. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but that's not a decision I have to make today." As they finally left, I felt Daniel's gentle hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. I wasn't. But for the first time since Richard died, I wasn't alone. That night I couldn't sleep. The old farmhouse Richard and I had shared for 40 years creaked and settled around me, its familiar sounds now seeming hollow and empty. I wandered from room to room in my nightgown, touching photographs, running my fingers over the furniture Richard had lovingly restored over the years. In our bedroom, my bedroom now, I opened his closet and breathed in the lingering scent of him. Old Spice and mint and that indefinable something that was just Richard. I pressed one of his flannel shirts to my face and let myself cry. Not just for him, but for everything that had happened since he left. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like gentle fingers. A spring storm, washing everything clean. I made my way downstairs to the kitchen and put the kettle on, an old habit from nights when sleep wouldn't come. As I waited for the water to boil, I noticed headlights sweeping across the driveway, a car pulling up, its engine cutting off. Fear spiked through me. It was nearly midnight. Who would come at this hour? I peered through the curtains to see Rebecca stepping out of her Mercedes, huddled against the rain, alone. No Michael, no attorney, just my daughter-in-law, looking smaller somehow without her usual armor of confidence. The doorbell rang. I hesitated, then went to answer it. Rebecca stood on the porch, rain dripping from her hair, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "I'm sorry it's so late," she said, her voice hoarse. "Can I come in?" I stepped back, allowing her inside. She looked around the entry hall as if seeing it for the first time, though she'd been here countless times for holidays and family dinners. "Tea?" I offered, returning to the kitchen where the kettle was now whistling. She nodded, following me silently. I busied myself with mugs and tea bags, giving her time to collect herself. When I finally placed a steaming mug before her at the kitchen table, she wrapped her manicured hands around it like she was cold to the bone. "Michael doesn't know I'm here," she said finally. "He's not handling things well." I said nothing, waiting. I'd learned long ago that silence often draws out what needs to be said. "That letter," she continued, staring into her tea. "What Richard wrote. About choosing money over family." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Is that really what you think of us? That we just wanted the money? What else was I supposed to think?" I asked quietly. "You locked me out of my own store. You tried to cut me out of the will reading. You treated me like I was disposable." She flinched at that word, Richard's word from the letter. It wasn't about the money. Not really. She took a shaky breath. It was about control. About proving we could run things better than an old woman, I supplied. "I didn't see you that way at first," she admitted. "When Michael and I started dating, I admired you. How you ran the store, kept the books, knew every customer by name. But then," she trailed off. "Then what? Then I realized Michael would never really be in charge as long as you and Richard were around. That he'd always be the son, never the boss. I wanted him to be more, to have more. I pushed him. To forge documents? To steal money?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. She had the grace to look ashamed. "That was Christopher's idea. The shell company, the transfer. Michael just went along with it. He's a grown man, Rebecca. He made his choices." "I know." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "But now he might lose everything. His family, his inheritance. Me." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" I told him tonight that I can't do this anymore. "The lying, the scheming. That's not who I wanted to be." A tear slid down her cheek. "We've been having problems for years. This was just the final straw." I felt a complicated mix of emotions. sadness for my son's marriage, but also a strange respect for Rebecca that I hadn't felt in a long time. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry." She wiped her eyes. "And because I'm afraid of what Michael might do. He's desperate. He said things tonight about stopping the will, about making sure that man, Daniel, gets nothing." A chill ran through me. "What kinds of things?" "Nothing specific. Just, I've never seen him like this." She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. "Be careful, Lorraine. That's all I'm saying." After she left, I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, turning over everything in my mind. The anger and pain I'd felt toward my children. The unexpected connection I'd found with Daniel. The legacy Richard had tried to protect. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called Mr. Goldstein as soon as his office opened. "I need to make some changes," I told him. 2 hours later, I sat across from him, Daniel at my side, signing new documents. "Are you sure about this?" Mr. Goldstein asked, concern evident in his voice. "After everything they did?" I nodded, the pen steady in my hand. "I'm keeping my half of the store, and Daniel keeps his. But I'm adding a clause that allows Michael and Jennifer to earn shares back over time, if they work in the business, if they commit to preserving what their father and I built." Daniel smiled at me, no judgment in his eyes. "Richard would have understood," he said softly. "It's not just about them," I explained. "It's about me, about who I choose to be." I signed the final page with a flourish. I won't let bitterness be my legacy. Mr. Goldstein gathered the papers. "I'll file these today, and I'll arrange a meeting with Michael and Jennifer to explain the new terms." As we left his office, Daniel asked, "Do you think they'll accept? Do you think they can change?" I thought about Rebecca's visit, about the shame in her eyes, about Michael's question, "Is there any way to fix this?" About Jennifer, who hadn't spoken to me since the reading. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I'm giving them the chance. Not because they deserve it, but because it's who I am, who I've always been." Daniel squeezed my hand. "That's why Richard loved you so much, and that's why—" He hesitated. "That's why I'm proud to be your son." The words washed over me like a blessing. We walked to the parking lot together, two strangers becoming family with each passing day. Behind us, the new will was being processed, a document that offered both justice and mercy, boundaries and second chances. I didn't know if Michael and Jennifer would take the opportunity I was offering. I didn't know if our family could ever heal from these wounds. But for the first time since Richard died, I felt something like peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd remained true to myself, even when I had every reason not to. Sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between justice and mercy, between holding on and letting go, between the past that haunts us and the future we dare to imagine. I'd made my choice. The rest was up to them. 3 months have passed since that day in Mr. Goldstein's office, when I handed over the envelope that changed everything. 3 months of rebuilding, of rediscovering, of quiet mornings with coffee on the porch swing where Richard and I used to sit. 3 months of learning who I am without him, but never alone. The bell above the door at Davidson Hardware still rings the same way it did when Richard installed it in 1987. The sound still makes me smile, even now, especially now. This morning, as I walked through the store straightening displays and greeting customers by name, I caught a glimpse of myself in the decorative mirror near the paint samples. Gray hair neatly pinned back, laugh lines deeper than they were a year ago. A simple silver necklace Daniel gave me for my birthday last month. Not young anymore, certainly, but not invisible either. "Mrs. D," Sam called from the register. "Your 9 o'clock is here." My 9 o'clock. Such a formal way to refer to my son. But that's what our relationship had become. Scheduled meetings, careful conversations, rebuilding trust one brick at a time. Michael stood by the key-cutting station, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched slightly. He'd lost weight these past months. The divorce papers had been finalized last week. Rebecca had moved to Chicago for a fresh start, and Michael had moved into a small apartment above the barbershop downtown. "Good morning," I said. professional but not cold. "Morning, Mom." He still struggled to meet my eyes for long. "The shipment came in. I've already checked it against the invoice." "Thank you." I nodded toward the office. "Coffee?" He followed me to the small room at the back of the store that had once been Richard's domain. Now it was mine, though I'd kept his old fishing photos on the wall and the worn leather chair where he'd sit to go over the books every Friday night. I poured 2 mugs from the pot that was always brewing. "How are you holding up?" I asked, passing one to him. Michael wrapped his hands around the mug, a gesture that reminded me so much of Rebecca that night in my kitchen. "I'm okay. The apartment's small, but it's enough for now." "And the community service?" Part of our agreement, drafted by Mr. Goldstein and approved by a sympathetic judge, was that Michael would serve 200 hours of community service instead of facing charges for the money he'd taken. He'd been helping rebuild houses for low-income families on the other side of town. "It's good," he said, and for the first time that morning, he truly met my gaze. "I'm learning things. Skills. Dad tried to teach me years ago that I was too stubborn to pay attention to." Something eased in my chest, a knot of worry loosening just slightly. "Daniel's coming by later," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "He's bringing the new inventory system he wants to install." Michael tensed, but only slightly. "Progress. He knows his stuff," he admitted reluctantly. "The changes he made to the accounting system last month, they make sense. More progress. Slow, painful, but real." "Have you heard from Jennifer?" I asked, the question that always hung between us. Michael shook his head. "Not since she moved to Florida with Paul. She's still angry. At you, at Daniel, at me, mostly." He set his coffee down. "She feels betrayed by everyone." I nodded, the familiar ache of my daughter's absence throbbing dully. Jennifer had refused my olive branch, had declined to work at the store, had cut off contact with all of us. The last I'd heard, she and Paul were trying to start over in Tampa. I sent birthday cards, left voicemails. Nothing came back. "She'll come around," Michael said, though neither of us believed it. Eventually, the store was opening in 15 minutes. I could hear Sam greeting the early birds who always gathered outside, retirees who came for coffee, and conversation as much as for hardware. "You should get out there," I said, standing. "Mrs. Peterson will want to tell you all about her new rose trellis." Michael grimaced, but there was the ghost of a smile behind it. "She always brings those rock-hard oatmeal cookies, which you will eat and compliment, because that's what we do for loyal customers." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and in his voice was a respect that had been missing for too long. As he left the office, I took a moment to straighten Richard's fishing photo, the one where he's holding a massive bass, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "We're getting there," I whispered to him. "Slowly, but we're getting there." Later that afternoon, as the spring sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors, Daniel arrived with his laptop and a box of donuts. He'd started working at the store part-time, still keeping his job with Mr. Goldstein, but dedicating weekends and some evenings to learning the business. "How'd it go with Michael?" he asked as we sat in the office after closing. "Better," I said. "He actually complimented your accounting system." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "Wow, that's unexpected." "He's trying," I said. "That's all we can ask for now." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. In the 3 months since we'd found each other, he'd never pushed for more than I could give, never demanded the years of mothering he'd missed. Instead, he'd simply shown up, fixing the leaky faucet in my kitchen, bringing dinner on Thursdays, listening to stories about Richard with genuine interest. "I ran into Rebecca last week," he said suddenly. "At the courthouse." I straightened. "Oh? How was that?" "Surprisingly okay. She's working with a domestic violence shelter now, helping women rebuild their financial lives." He smiled slightly. "She actually apologized to me for everything she said that day in Goldstein's office." "People can surprise you," I said softly. "Sometimes when I look back on that day in the will reading, I marvel at how silent I was, how I never raised my voice, never accused, never raged against the injustice of being pushed aside. I simply handed over an envelope and let the truth speak for itself. that silence, that dignity, did more than any shouting could have done. It made them see me, really see me, perhaps for the first time in years, in the quiet of that reading room as Mr. Goldstein revealed Richard's true wishes. I watched the color drain from my children's faces. I saw the moment they realized what they'd done, what they'd become. And though it broke my heart to see them hurt, it was a necessary pain, the kind that precedes healing. I sleep peacefully now in the bed Richard and I shared for so many years, not because I won some battle of wills, not because justice was served cold, but because I chose grace when I could have chosen vengeance. I chose to leave the door open when I could have locked it forever. Some nights, I swear I can feel Richard beside me, his warmth a memory that hasn't faded. "You did good, Laurie," I imagine him saying. "You did exactly right." And in those moments between wakefulness and dreams, I know that the truest inheritance isn't money or property, or even family connections. It's the knowledge that when tested, when hurt beyond measure, when standing at the crossroads of bitterness and forgiveness, I chose the harder path, the one that honors not just who Richard was, but who I have always been. In the end, the blood that matters most isn't the kind that runs in your veins. It's the kind that pulses through your heart when you choose love over hatred, mercy over revenge, and hope over despair. That's the legacy I'm building now, one quiet day at a time. Sometimes the greatest power we have isn't in what we say, but in what we choose not to say. When my children tried to erase me from my husband's legacy, I could have screamed, fought, or threatened. Instead, I handed over a simple envelope and let the truth speak for itself. In that moment of silence, as they realized what they'd done, I found my strength not in revenge, but in dignity. What would you have done in my place? Would you have chosen bitterness or forgiveness? Would you have slammed the door shut on those who hurt you, or left it open for them to find their way back? The hardest choices we face aren't between right and wrong, but between justice and mercy, between punishing those who've wounded us, or offering them a path to redemption they may not deserve. In the end, Richard protected me even after he was gone. But the real protection came from within, from knowing who I am and refusing to let others' cruelty change that. That's the inheritance worth fighting for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Follow our channel for more stories of family, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that speaks louder than words. Remember, the blood that matters most isn't always the kind that runs in your veins.